We never give away control of the data completely to those service providers, to vendors. We always retain, some ways of controlling and seeing what's going on in the cloud and what the partners are doing with the data and such. But the fact is, the tool and the talent is available out there to protect our data better than we ever could on premise.
Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of The Future of Data Security. Today I'm speaking with Martin Dinel, Assistant Deputy Minister and Chief Information Security Officer at the Government of Alberta. Martin, thank you for chatting with me today.
It's my pleasure, Jean.
Just to get started, I'm really curious about what initially attracted you to cybersecurity. I saw that you joined the government in 1987, which was when I was born. So how has your role as CISO at the Government of Alberta started and shaped your perspective on data security?
Actually, if we go back to 1987, indeed, I came here on an exchange program, actually, between university students from Quebec and from Alberta. And I was studying computer science at the time, computer engineering to be more precise. I had the privilege of getting a position in the healthcare sector here in Alberta, where I was responsible to essentially create an IT department from scratch. So I was literally designing the network, designing a few application systems, implementing the data center, the servers in it, and all this stuff. One of the things that's happened over the first few years of that particular position is I realized that I tended to pay more attention to the security side of things. Now, of course, cybersecurity and the role of a CISO and so on and so forth did not exist in 1989, early 90s and such. So I was doing a lot of system administration. I like to configure systems to make them secure. And I realized as I was moving forward, I went to work in the private sector for a while, in the pipeline industry, to be more precise, insurance industry as a consultant as well, before rejoining the government. I always tended to actually lean towards the cybersecurity type tasks. That's what I enjoyed doing the most. When I joined the Government of Alberta just over 9 years ago, I'm now on my 10th year as a Chief Information Security Officer for the Government of Alberta. It became my 100% focus. It was no longer just something I enjoyed doing, sometimes something on the side, but rather it was something that I was doing every day, planning, from a cybersecurity perspective, looking at threats, preventing incidents, dealing with incidents when they happen. And I absolutely love my job as a result.
And how have you seen the data security landscape evolve, particularly in the public sector, since you started your career?
It has evolved greatly. As I mentioned earlier, when I created the IT department for that organization I worked for early in my career, most solutions we were implementing were on site, very often on the computer you were using. They weren't even networked necessarily. So I saw the environment evolve to a point where, of course, systems started to be networked. We connected to the internet, opening up more potential threats essentially to our organization, and it continued to evolve that way up to, well, for me here at the Government of Alberta a few years ago, where all of a sudden we started to use and leverage the cloud prominently as well as mobile technology. So we went from protecting a system very often to protecting a network system, and now, of course, a system that is totally exposed on the internet, including the devices we use to access our data. So it's a big evolution, and this is why also we're seeing, I think, a lot more incidents happening in the whole world.
Talking about the evolution of things, obviously, cloud technologies have and are reshaping data security strategies across all sectors. I saw you have great experience in both private and public sector. How has the Government of Alberta approached cloud adoption while at the same time maintaining strong data security for citizens' data and other precious data that you hold?
We took a little bit of a different approach if I compare to other jurisdictions across the country. A lot of jurisdictions were kind of over-analyzing the cloud. The fact that the attack surface, as you move data to the cloud and using more mobile technology, it increases. You have a larger surface, more incidents could potentially happen. But what I realized very early is that number one, if we were not in the cloud, the only ways to actually share information with external parties, with partners, other organizations we work with, were through unsecure methods, like things like FTP. Even if you go with secure FTP, not the best way to actually share a file. You lose control of the file the minute you give access to someone. Email attachments and things like that. So realize that actually sharing information more centrally, not having multiple copies of a file, having more control over them, and then trusting the vendors as well, ended up making us not less, but rather more secure as we move forward. Yes, the surface attack is increasing, but the tools that are available on the cloud are absolutely amazing when you compare to what we used to have on site. If we look at the personnel also protecting the data in the cloud in our data centers that are, whether it's Microsoft, Google, or Amazon, those are fantastic security professionals, people who are being paid way more than what we can afford to pay public servants, for instance. And they also invest millions into those data centers to ensure that the data is secure. So we never give away control of the data completely to those service providers, to vendors. We always retain, some ways of controlling and seeing what's going on in the cloud and what the partners are doing with the data and such. But the fact is, the tool and the talent is available out there to protect our data better than we ever could on premise.
Let's talk about the theme of the day, the bell of the dance, the Gen AI transformation that's happening. And in particular, I'm interested on hearing your thoughts on how does that affect both structured and unstructured data, and how you're going to be securing that data in this brave new world.
Okay. Well, to start with, I'm going to talk a little bit about structure versus unstructured data. For us, we don't make much of a difference between the two types of data. The key thing that we do is we always risk assess any data collection that we gather, whether it's a document or whether it's a database, we treat it in the same way. We also perform essentially security classification of the data to ensure we understand the sensitivity of the data. So that's one key thing the Government of Alberta does that not all organizations I've seen actually have in place. We understand what are the crown jewels in our organization, and we understand what can be shared publicly without any major impacts to our organizations or to our citizens. So that's a key thing that we do. In terms of generative AI, certainly I can see tremendous advantages to implementing this technology from a productivity perspective in our organization. So I will never stand in the way of implementing tools that essentially will make it better for employees to deal with the data, to do their job, essentially, to make more informed decisions and such. So definitely not standing in the way. What we have to make sure we do, though, is just as we assess our data, we also assess the tools that we're using. We evaluate and assess or identify also the risks, the potential risk with using some of that technology. An example with the ChatGPT, there are some organizations that went a little too fast in implementing these systems because all of a sudden they realized that they were using a public version of the app and that everything they put in the app was becoming part of the knowledge base, right? So it becomes a big threat. So we realized that very early. So we put some guidelines on how to use these tools. We didn't stop people from using them. We put guidelines around it. And that was until we could bring in our own instances of these tools on premise with a knowledge base that is protected from a public perspective and input that was not being retained as a knowledge base, essentially, moving forward. So from that perspective, again, it's not a question of not using these very powerful and useful tools for our users. It's actually to evaluate them, assess them, understand the risk, and implement them the right way and provide some guidelines on how they can be used and an overview of the risks if you don't use them properly. So that was the main thing we did. We're starting to leverage Gen AI as well for other purpose, in particular, security. We've implemented some user behavior analysis tools, digital user behavior analysis tool that are AI-based. We've implemented some incident analysis tools that are AI-based. At this point in time, It's still early in the game. We know that we need to understand those tools if we want to be successful in protecting our environment. I mean, the threat actors are investing a ton of time and money into their study of those tools to use them in a malicious way. If we don't start looking at those tools from a defensive perspective, we're going to be behind the 8 ball, and we're going to be essentially in a bad situation in a few years. So we make sure we understand the tools, we implement them gradually. I mentioned for us, AI right now, I'm going to call it augmented intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence. We don't let the tools make decisions, but we let the tool inform us of, recommendations. What is the problem that we're looking at right now, are the incident? What are the root causes? What is a good way to deal with it? And then we have a human being interact with the tool to actually make it happen. It's a more cautious approach at this point in time, but again, this is early in the game. I'm just very happy that our organization right now is letting us research those tools and move forward with that way of thinking. Because I see way too many organizations right now that are so scared of AI. They're missing out from a productivity perspective, and they're missing out as well, even from a cybersecurity protection perspective. They will be caught in a bad spot in a couple of years if they don't start looking at those tools immediately.
I like your augmented intelligence terminology. In terms of the most useful use cases for data security and privacy, where do you see these tools in, say, 12 to 36 months having the most return on investment, the most impact for security professionals?
Well, for quite a few years, we've had a SIM, an area where all the logs, the incidents, everything that's happened in our environment has been gathered and collected. We also have incident management tools where we collected data and how those incidents are being managed. And I think from a security perspective, that's certainly where I can see the most usefulness out of AI tools, Gen AI tools at this point in time. We can now take that data that we've been gathering for years and make it become useful to make better informed decisions and faster decisions as well. We're at a point now in our environment where a ransomware event, the presence of ransomware, is reported to my analyst within seconds, pretty much. And we can immediately isolate systems. We're not that far from even letting the AI isolate the systems when we see something like this, because we also know we can react to it quickly and bring the system back online if it's a false positive or the ransomware has been isolated, quarantined. So it's really the way I'm looking at it right now. It's faster reaction, proactive protection against threats as well. It's always a good thing. I'm in the public sector. We like it when we prevent an incident from happening by managing the threat as opposed to the incident. Then we don't end up in newspapers. That's always a good thing. But yes, this is definitely where I see AI in particular and Gen AI becoming more useful. Faster reaction time.
If you were to make a prediction, and we won't hold you to it, as to when we're going to move from this augmentation regime to decision and automated reaction, what would be your prediction?
We're not very far. I'm going to guess about maybe 18 months to 24 months. In that time frame, I think we're going to be in a position where we can leverage AI more. One of the things that I think is going to happen, we're still going to have some people who are on call after hours, for instance, but the need to have an analyst sitting in front of a computer and looking at things turning red and alerting the right teams to deal with it, that's not going to be necessary, I think, within the next couple of years. Because AI can monitor things turning red, can even act on some of those issues, incidents that are manifesting themselves, and they can also alert people to actually deal with the incidents if it's required. So 18 to 24 months, I think we're going to be there.
Is it fair to say we're heading in a world where the human risk analysts will be replaced, in fact, by this AI risk analyst that's doing all the same things, and humans will be involved in other more complex and value-added tasks?
Not quite. I think maybe from an incident management perspective more than from a risk perspective. There are so many complex issues relating to identifying threats and risk and assessing the risks indeed. I think there's going to be humans involved at least some level moving forward for several more years. I mean, we're going to have to deal with more complex technologies indeed. AI technology as an attack mechanism against us. So we will require some humans, people with experience, augmented once again by AI tool to actually deal with those incidents. So I'm not too worried about that. That's what I tell all of my friends who are in cybersecurity right now. There might not be as much of a need for dedicated environment monitoring and incident response people, but from a risk perspective, we're going to need people moving forward and for many years.
Talking about risks, one that I'm tracking and is emerging is really related to files and AI systems that are consuming files as machines in new and unusual ways. A great example of that is for example, Microsoft Copilot for M365, which is really creating a scenario where previously, if you had overshared files, it wasn't like your employees would spend all day perusing around to see what they have access to. But now with these tools that are using existing access, no stone will be left unturned, and that could potentially expose a lot more sensitive data. Do you have a perspective on that emerging issue and how, generally speaking, we're going to deal with systems, machines that are accessing files, data in new and unusual ways?
Yes, we've actually experienced it as we were testing Microsoft Copilot for security actually a few months ago, where you could ask a question to Copilot about, for instance, list all the files that have only administrative privilege, and all of a sudden it listed the files. Even just that in itself can be a risk. But in some cases, we're able to open some of the files as well or see the content. So that can be scary indeed. So the tools, again, are still immature. They are becoming, and that's one of the reasons why we chose to embark on the path of AI immediately. We want to be part of this journey. We want to find out about those issues and help dealing with those issues moving forward. So yeah, there are certainly some risks that are manifesting themselves this way. The biggest risk, I think, we need to protect our devices better. Endpoint management is becoming better with the tools we're implementing right now, including AI, managing the identities, identifying people who are trying to move across system or increase their privileges and such. All the tools that we have in place right now can help us identify those things quickly. So I think I'm trying not to worry too much about what can happen after the compromise and worry more about stopping the compromise before it happens. That's for sure. But the fact is that if somebody finds a way to compromise our systems and get into them, the access they will have at that point in time today, using those AI tools and such, could be quite impactful to an organization.
Another massive risk of the day is shadow AI. Obviously, whether or not an organization blocks a tool or it's unauthorized, employees are using their devices, they're sending emails to their personal accounts, etc. What are your thoughts on this risk, which I believe is fully formed? It's there, whether people admit it or not. And how do you think about this at the Government of Alberta?
We try to eliminate shadow IT, period, end of sentence, never mind shadow AI, by being very open-minded and working close to our customers. And we try, like, we're not people, especially from a security perspective, it used to be known as the no group. Like, you went to ask them for anything and they said, nope, can't do that. Nope, can't do that. We don't do that. We never say no. We've turned things around when I first came on board by basically taking more of a risk-based approach, where somebody comes to us with an idea, a solution sometimes, and we'll sit down with them and explain to them what the risks are. And at the end of the day, if the business wants to use that solution, even though there are some risks and they don't want to mitigate them, they just want to accept them, we basically take the approach of, okay, we've explained the risks. You're agreeing to use the tool. So sign on the dotted line here on this document where we reported the risks to make sure that you can't come back and say, they never told me that these things could happen, right? But at the same time, we just try to support them in using the tools that they want. We're very clear in our organization right now in terms of who actually owns the data, which ministry owns which data, which person is the information controller and therefore makes decisions about that data. So those are the people we're working with. And again, we're very clear about our role as well. We're experts in cybersecurity. We're not experts in business or delivering necessarily government systems, government services, I should say. So we let them make the decisions. We inform them of what we know, the risks involved.
I know that you fully embrace the Government of Alberta as your home, but still you have extensive experience in private sector organizations. Are there differences or things that you were able to do in the private sectors that are different with the public sector? What are your thoughts on the differences between the two sectors?
I think I'm going to start with maybe the digital assets that we protect. I think when it comes to government, we're mainly talking about data about the public, our citizens, services they consume and such. And we're also talking about if that data became public, there could be privacy issues and also a major loss of reputation for the Government of Alberta, in my case, if there was some major compromise happening. On the private sector side, it's not so much private data and privacy issues, but probably more secrets that the organization holds, whether it's about the way they do business, it could be about, like in the pipeline industry, how the pipeline works and things like that. So those secrets are what people want to protect. And the impacts, if the secrets are not protected, are not as much from a privacy perspective, maybe not even as much from a reputation perspective, but definitely from a financial perspective. So that's the main difference, I would say, between private and public sector.
I'm really curious if you see some major differences between private public sector, having had the opportunity to lead cybersecurity teams in both.
So essentially, that's that. When it comes to actually providing security services, the public sector historically has been slower to adopt technologies and such. I will admit we've made some major differences here in Alberta by, number one, taking that risk-based approach that I mentioned earlier. People trust us more. So when we come forward and we say we want to bring in this tool and here's the reason why, they actually trust us and they will let us do it. So we're actually getting pretty close to the way the private sector worked for me. But that's probably the main difference. Private sector, they have more money. They definitely don't have to worry about taxpayers' money and things like that. So when they need a tool, they usually don't hesitate. They want to protect their environment. All they need to understand is if it's not protected, what will be the financial impact? And if the impact is quite large, spending even millions of dollars to protect yourself, if you're going to lose hundreds of millions not being protected, they move way faster from that perspective.
It really seems that you've fully embraced what's happening. You've brought a leadership style at the Government of Alberta that's aligned with innovation and cyber, all the teams of the day with Gen AI. And I think it's a very good thing. I know often public sector government organizations have a reputation for lagging behind, but it really seems like you guys are leading the parade at the Government of Alberta.
Yeah, I would agree with this comment, definitely. And we're seeing that. I was chairperson of the National Committee on Information Protection for about 8 of the past 9 years, essentially. I just gave up the chair this year. It was time for a change. And I'm more focused also on our Cyber Alberta program, because we stopped just protecting Government of Alberta proper, and we're now strengthening the overall cybersecurity posture of the whole province of Alberta right now by helping our Alberta stakeholders. We have to take this approach right now, this leadership approach, taking a look at technologies and seeing what makes sense for us, understanding the threats better and making sure that the whole province understands the threats essentially that are directed at them, the attacks that are directed at them, but also the technology that can be used to improve their ability to prevent serious incidents. So yeah, we had to take this leadership role. In my view, we didn't have a choice. Now, some people might have just backed away from it, but I thought it was necessary for the province for us to take this approach. We've embraced it. It's being supported from all levels, whether it's staff in other ministries or senior management. And I definitely appreciate this support because it also makes it easier then for me to attract and retain good talent, good cybersecurity talent. Public sector is bleeding talent right now, right? Because they can't pay enough. So as a result, a lot of people will just move on and go and work in the private sector where they can make twice the money, for instance. But for us at the Government of Alberta, we have such interesting projects that we find that we haven't had too much of a problem bringing in new talent and training new talent because they get excited about the technology that they get to use.
It's always the case that employees are ultimately motivated by the projects, what's happening, what's the mission.
Yes, and open-mindedness as well, because that's the other thing. I've been in shops before where you have a lead, right? A person who decides what you're going to do, who does all the visioning, and staff gets bored with that because they have some ideas too. And I think that's one of the things we've adopted as well within Government of Alberta right now. Everybody has a chance to speak. The entire leadership team is leading, not one person. And as a result, we have new ideas popping up all the time for projects, new ways of dealing with problems that, are more efficient as we move forward, because the people in the trenches have the ability to actually provide input and feedback on the way we do business and on the threats that we're facing.
You're a part of the National CISO subcommittee and other organizations. Can you paint a picture for the audience on how various government, whether provincial and at the federal levels, collaborate together to ensure the safety and security of citizens' information?
There are a few various groups, essentially, that involve the right people from each jurisdiction, provincial, territorial, as well as federal. And we also have municipal attendance at these meetings as well through MISA, which is kind of the Municipalities Information System Association, I think it's called, MISA. So essentially, we have monthly meetings, but we also have kind of a bat phone line, if I can call it this way, where we can communicate quickly if there are some issues going on amongst jurisdictions. So the monthly meetings are leveraged to talk about the evolving threat, about technologies that we're using in each of our provinces. We try to learn indeed from lessons learned, not always by trying. If an organization has already piloted a tool and found it successful or not successful, we like to hear about it. We don't want to waste time or taxpayers' money on that. So this is why we share information. Now, you mentioned the NCCIP committee that I'm part of, and I've been part of it for as long as I've been CISO. This committee has existed since 1998, interestingly enough. A privacy committee got formed as well a few years back, as well as a data management committee. In some of those committees, I actually participate as well. And then we also have more senior leadership type meetings that are occurring. One of them, which started in Quebec City, funny enough, 4 years ago, Government of Quebec got it started, is the Digital Trust and Cybersecurity Symposium, which involves the ministers and deputy ministers of all jurisdictions, the people who are essentially in charge of technology and innovations. Those people meet on an annual basis, and we come up with kind of a pan-Canadian plan, things that are priorities for the public sector and how we're going to address them at a high level. And then we assign some of the tasks resulting from these meetings to those other committees, like, for instance, NCCIP or the Privacy Committee or Data Management Committee. It's been working out quite well. There is a lot more collaboration than people would ever think of. People probably think, Government of Alberta supports the province of Alberta and that's that. No. We actually work with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity all the time. We have these meetings through NCCIP and such. It never ends. It's actually a good thing. Sharing information is power in cybersecurity. People who tend to isolate themselves end up failing when they are under attack because they don't know about the attack ahead of time. They don't know about the technology to protect themselves ahead of time. And they certainly don't have any partners they can reach out to help them deal with the attacks.
You've had a rich career, and I'm curious if you were to talk to a younger Martin or someone that's starting out, if you would have some key advice and insights to share.
I think the key advice that I would have given myself was that comment I made about risk-based cybersecurity. early in my career, I really believed that I was doing the right thing from a security perspective. And I would tend sometimes butt head with some of the people from the business, right? To try to make them understand how important it was to do this security thing that I was so passionate about. I was successful in a lot of cases because indeed I am passionate about it. I've always been a passionate person. But in some cases, I just could not convince people until I understood once again that that's not my decision. Cybersecurity is not the business that I'm in. In my case right now, it's government business. When I was with Enbridge Pipeline, it was essentially transportation of oil across the country. So let the business people make the decision, but understand my role, which is indeed to inform them about cybersecurity, the risk incurred, and potential mitigation techniques and such. Once I understood that, I was a lot happier. So that's probably the main advice I'd give myself as a young Martin, back when I was about 21, 22 years old.
All right. If we're to recap the future of data security, what would be the top 3, let's say, key points that you think are going to be a major factor moving forward?
AI obviously is going to be a major factor. The cybersecurity incidents will continue to increase as well. So there's going to be more and more of a focus and a need for cybersecurity professionals to get closer and tighter with their senior management. There can't be any misinformation happening when it comes to cybersecurity with your senior management because they're the ones making the decision. So that's the 2 top things. I'm going to add one more, and it's not so much forward looking as it is backward looking, but I'm from public sector, but I've also seen it happen in private sector. There's so much of a focus on AI and on the future of technology at this point in time that people tend to forget those application systems that they've been using for maybe 25 years, 30 years, 20 years that were built back then without much security. And what they don't realize sometimes is that the AI and the new services we're putting together are sitting on top of that foundation, the data that is being managed by those older apps that might be vulnerable. So my big advice right now would be make sure that, look at the future, but don't forget, keep an eye on your legacy systems, the systems in your organization that you count on, that are your foundation, but were designed at a time where maybe security was just not the top focus.
Martin, unfortunately, that's all we're going to have time to cover for today. Time really flies. Before we wrap this up, if people want to follow along with your work, your updates, what's the best place for them to go?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn, of course, Martin Dinel at the Government of Alberta. I post videos from time to time and some updates so you can see what the government is doing. And the other one, I mentioned Cyber Alberta. That's our large community of interest where we're essentially collaborating with other organizations across the province to improve this strength, essentially, of cybersecurity measures across the province. So that's www.cyberalberta.ca. If you're in Alberta, if you're based in Alberta, please join us. We'd love to have you as a member, and that will just make the community stronger.
All right. Really insightful conversation. I've learned a lot. Let's keep in touch, and thank you again for joining.
That sounds very good. Thank you. It was my pleasure to participate.